And for those who actually stick to it, they will gain weight for a while, but then they will suddenly start losing a lot of weight. And they will drop way below what they gained when they started, and then keep losing weight. And so there's some sort of repair going on, and I don't ascribe it to a meat-based diet at all. I ascribe it to having sufficient calories for a sufficient amount of time.
Hey guys, what you'll be hearing in the following is our third really epic Q&A with the Viking of fitness himself, the Norwegian strength coach Borge Fagerli. And in this one, we'll be talking about nutrition and we'll be answering your nutrition-related questions. We'll talk about optimizing and resetting hunger and satiety signaling, optimizing your diet for both body composition and longevity, and lots of other cool stuff. If you'd like to get your questions to be answered in a webinar like this in the future, or just be part of the really cool discussions we have in our little community, join the Sustainable Self-Development Facebook group, linked in the show notes below, and also go ahead to sustainableselfdevelopment.com, and there you'll be able to get up to date about everything we'll be doing. At the moment, you can sign up for an upcoming training template we're working on at the moment, but we could well come out with some really cool resources about nutrition as well. So be sure to check these resources out, and with that, let's get into this episode. All right, everybody, hopefully you can see this broadcast being live, but if you don't, this will be up on YouTube, and in podcast version it will be available as well, so it doesn't matter that much. So this is our third Q&A with Borge, and we have done two webinars, Q&A webinars so far on training and different training methods, and we answered a lot of your training related questions, and this time we will be talking about nutrition, and Borge will be outlining a lot of his nutritional principles that he likes to adhere to these days, and hopefully we will be able to shed a lot of light on these topics to all of you guys. And we selected, I believe, about 15 of your questions, so we will see how we will be able to go through all of these. So I just want to say one thing before we start out with all of this, is that I think that when it comes to nutrition, the if it ain't broke, don't fix it principle applies, at least somewhat. So if you're currently feeling great, you're lean, look like the way you look, performing great in the gym, your digestion is great, then, then just keep doing what you're doing. If you're able to accomplish that by eating McDonald's, then do it. Probably that's not going to be a lot of you, but nevertheless, we are only here to help. So that's how the information you will be hearing here should be received, I think. So with that, I will be handing the mic now over to Borge, and I would like to just ask you to give I don't know, however long of a time you need to just give a short intro into your philosophies about nutrition. Like if someone came to you and asked you, I just want to look good and I want to be healthy, want to have good digestion, kind of as a principle of, well, if confused, if you're not sure, just start here. Like what would be that basic kind of 101 kind of guideline that you would give to that person? So Borge, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a question that I'm not going to claim to have all the answers or know the secret or the single truth at all. So this is just going to be, as with the training aspect of things, just sort of like an evolutionary summary of what I tend to think is closer to the truth. And again, I'm sort of completely against the whole religious zealotry approach to nutrition, where you should always do extreme things. But I've sort of been looking through this from the lens of evolution as a human species, but also sort of an ancestral perspective, that what have we been doing and thriving on for the last few generations. And in modern times, I mean, there's so many pressures and factors and variables involved outside of food that sometimes just the fact that you're worrying so much about food is probably going to be more damaging than the actual food could ever be. And I mean, people are so stressed and anxious and worried all the time about how much and what they're eating, and just trying to biohack this shit and that shit all the time. And I think that's sometimes the main problem. And I have even developed methods on how to handle the process of sort of entertaining your thoughts so much that it's in itself creating stress and physiological reactions. I've also been interested in in the circadian rhythm and seasonality aspect of things, where we as a human species evolved with daylight and night. I mean, cycles of light and dark, winters and summers, and I mean, just sort of getting back to the rhythm of life that we have evolved on will sometimes fix more problems than whatever exercise or nutritional intervention could ever do. But so as a human species, I don't think we are that much different. I mean, a gorilla will eat what a gorilla eats. A dog will eat what a dog eats, except for when we feed it, obviously, and we feed it the same foods that we eat, and they end up as fat and sick as we do. But that's a digression. But single species of all mammals on Earth have practically the same foods with very minor variations. And I mean, our gut and digestive system has evolved through 2 million years to digest mostly animal foods, simply because most of the planet has been covered in ice for most of our evolution. Because we had an ice age which lasted until, well, not long ago, when you look at the whole timeline. I mean, imagine standing at one goal of a soccer field. I mean, we're in the soccer times now, or football as we say here. And a normal soccer field is about 100 meters long. So imagine this being the start of humanity, the human race, and the other goal on the other side of the football field being sort of where we are now in modern times. Now, agriculture and the domestication of plants and the ability to have like available foods at all times only started like 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is the equivalent of walking all through the field to the other goal. And you're just walking and walking and walking, and all through this time, we are basically subsisting on, if we could hunt and fish something, we would do that. Whatever plant foods were available were very scarce and very seasonal. And as you get closer to the goal line, the last 10 to 20 centimeters is equivalent to the agricultural revolution. So we've basically been having access to like grains and unlimited access to like fruits and berries and in and outside of season for only like the last 10 centimeters of that whole soccer field of evolution. And I think that kind of sets the tone for like what the human race has sort of evolved on. And incidentally, we had the biggest brains and the highest bone density 10,000 years ago, and it's been rapidly declining since then. Obviously, many factors involved, but I mean, we sort of gave up the length of a colon in order to be able to process as much nutrients as possible to support our inordinately large brains. The brain, according to the brain is like 2 to 5% of our body size, but requires 20 to 25% of energy. And in babies, it requires 90% of energy, which just speaks for sort of the energy-intensive brain. And we have a hydrochloric acid-based digestive system, small guts with no cecum, intestines that are about 5 times our body length, just like the wolves and the lions, whereas herbivores have intestines 25 times as long and are filled with a microbiome optimally suited for digesting plants and then converting those plants into fats. So basically, we are all fat-based metabolism. I mean, the herbivores convert nutrients and fiber into fat, short-chain fatty acids, and we do the same thing with plant foods. And so sort of animal and fat-based food, I think, should be as a staple. Maybe not all the time consistently, but I'm going to have to say that vegans are wrong on this one. Basically, that sure, you can survive on it for some time, but I've seen so many vegans just eventually having to resort to some animal-based food simply because they were, deficient in some nutrients or malnourished. And again, any vegan, they're very well informed and knowledgeable and have to use supplements. And if you're doing it for ethical reasons, just go ahead. If you're doing it because you watched a Netflix documentary, you should really read some better, you should gain some better knowledge. Okay, so Before the invention of refrigerators or the ability to store grains, we would have consumed higher protein, higher fat foods in winter when energy from plant food was less available, and vice versa. Rarely did we have a situation where both carbs and fat were abundant at the same time. And this is sort of some of the problems with modern foods, where we have highly palatable combinations of fats and sugars, and it makes us sort of overeat. I don't think we would ever hunt or scavenge for herbs and root veggies in order to make culinary creations. I think just plant foods would be for sustenance during times of scarcity and energy crisis. We also figured out how to prepare food so that we could extract as much nutrients as possible. I'm reading off notes list here, so it's my cheat sheet, while preventing digestive trouble. So cooking, fermentation, sprouting, sourdough, etc. We learned to extract more fat from animals as well, and replacing fats from nuts. Incidentally, wolves turn into dogs simply because we would give them lean meats and then keep the fats ourselves, as like the Plains Indians would do. We would have periods of feasting interspersed with famine and hunger. We would eat during daylight hours of the day, and not the constant barrage of calories ingested through our artificially created daylight that modern humans live in. And this is sort of a situation we are facing now. And no wild animal or human culture living on its natural diet suffers from chronic disease. And most people who live in traditional culture don't have any ideologies about diet. They eat what their ancestors have grown through generations. And when they introduce modern foods, bad stuff tends to happen. There are even recent times societies that are still mostly carnivorous, meaning they eat mostly animals and fats. The Inuit, the Maasai, the Plains Indians, Mongolians, the Gauchos, even the Laps and Samis, who are a Norwegian people, live way up north. And the Norwegian explorers Fridtjof Nansen and Fredrik Johansen actually lived off seals and polar bears for almost a full year back in 1895 when they did their historical walk. And they were just fine. So making sort of sense of all of this, I tend to think that as long as you remove the processed foods, the seed oils, the tasty combinations of sugars and fats, the preservatives and additives, and basically just remove all the foods that trigger cravings and addictions, you have done 80 to 90% of the work. There are, as I've been discussing recently in the Facebook group, I have done a ketogenic diet, I have done the zero carb diet, the carnivore diet, and it tends to just spontaneously heal a lot of diseases for people. And the ketogenic diets have a long record for neurological diseases and even cancer prevention, or not cancer prevention, because that's going to be really difficult to claim. But there have been spontaneous healing of various cancer types just by restricting carbs and focusing on a real deep ketosis. Obviously not all cancer types, but again, the Paleo Medicina Hungary group has been doing a lot of interesting research with, I think it's 4,000 to 5,000 patients, where they have seen some pretty impressive clinical outcomes in the last few years. Autoimmune diseases, especially, where basically the immune system starts attacking itself. And they seem to think that a lot of this is linked back to gut permeability, basically digestive function. The lining of the intestines, the cells that are breaking down and not being able to keep various proteins and immune factors inside the body, but instead it tends to leak into the bloodstream and trigger the immune system and cause all sorts of problems. So I think the reason for the success of those diets is simply because just a constant barrage of nutrients, maybe even processed foods, and for some people, plant foods can cause problems. I mean, I have some notes here on plant foods. I'm not going to go really deep into that, but there are very individual tolerance to plant foods simply because your gut function doesn't tolerate that. And instead of sort of trying to medicate your way out of that, I do tend to think that just removing it for a while can help you get better, improve that, and then reintroduce that later on. And this, I'm pretty much convinced, ties back to the whole seasonality of the human metabolism or human organism, where we would go for 3 to 6 months out of the year and not have like access to plants that are not even in season. I mean, they can be in season on the other side of the globe, and then just being transported several thousand miles, picked in an unripe condition, and then just sort of ripened chemically assisted. I think that tends to cause problems for a lot of people susceptible to it through their modern lifestyles. So the overarching theme here is be aware of the seasonality, be aware of the circadian rhythm aspect of things. We don't have time to dig deeper into that here today, but kind of starting to fix the framework first and then moving inside the box into the whole nutrient aspect of things and just sort of reset thing and heal things. And sometimes it takes like a higher protein and fat intake and perhaps the complete exclusion of plant foods just to sort of heal things up again and then reintroduce them as your metabolic flexibility and carb tolerance and glycolytic demands require. It is going to be the best approach you can do. And again, carb tolerance is highly individual. It's even related to the access to heat and sunlight. We know that cold and also lack of sunlight reduces carb tolerance, which makes a fuck ton of sense because us northerners, we tend to have a better response to low carb diet simply because longer part of the year is spent during being cold and having darkness. So again, just be aware, what did your ancestors eat the last, not just the 2 to 3 generations, but maybe for the last 10 to 20 generations in the area you live in or your ancestors lived in. That's going to take care of most of this stuff. And if you've been constantly bombarding your body with high carb foods, you're probably going to need to go through a keto adaptation, maybe even a zero carb approach for at least 4 to 6 weeks. Lose weight if you have a lot of body weight to lose. And this will eventually like reset a lot of things in your body. It will reintroduce metabolic flexibility, which is the ability to seamlessly switch from using fat and ketones for fuel and using glucose for fuel. And this sort of metabolic flexibility is broken if you haven't been keto adapted, since you were a baby, because we are sort of born with the ability to switch into ketosis very quickly. And one of the most important things for ad libitum dieting and a sustainable diet is restoring leptin sensitivity. First order of things is losing weight, losing body weight, since that's going to drive down leptin and it's going to restore the brain's sensitivity to that very important hormone. But the so-called adipostat, which is the ability to auto-regulate food intake according to your physical needs instead of blood glucose excursions or boredom or stress, is probably also going to require a period without any carbs. And the ketogenic diet seems to be very effective at restoring that CNS-based leptin sensitivity. Various neuroendocrine dysfunctions and even mitochondrial biogenesis. The mitochondria, which is sort of the powerhouse of the cell, and dysfunctions there are tied into both premature death and disease. And modern society, with again the barrage of the world we live in, tend to sort of destroy our mitochondrial function. It seems to be very central for both, not only health but also longevity. So that was a ranty way of trying to summarize my thoughts on the topic. But I've been on vegan diets, I've been on zero carb carnivore diets, and I've worked with so many people throughout the years that I had to sort of try to find models to explain what I saw and why things didn't work as expected in myself and my clients. And this is sort of the approach I have gradually arrived at, where as a base, I think you should have a lot of animal-based foods, unprocessed animal-based, animal meat and fat. But you should also have in-season plant foods, fruits and berries, according to your needs and individual tolerance. And obviously, the needs is going to be dictated not only by your body fat percentage and body weight and goals, fat loss versus muscle gain, but also how hard are you training and how intensive are you training and how long are you training and how often are you training. So I hope that made any sense at all.
No, that was perfect. I think you managed to pack a fuck ton of information to within a pretty short time frame. So kudos for that. And yeah, so that was a really cool kind of intro. And with that, let's try and answer some questions. And yeah, hopefully all of the answers in the light of what you could just hear will make more sense to those of you listening. So let's start with question number one. So a lot of people have heard about your carnivore diet experiment, and perhaps a lot of listeners here have heard the podcast episode we've done together or have read your book. And the question is, how did your views on the optimal setup for a carnivore diet change ever since your consultation with Paleo Medicina Hungary?
Well, the main and the reason I contacted them was because I started feeling not so good on the carnivore diet. And after discussing this with them through messages, I figured, well, their approach is like a 2-to-1 ratio in fat versus protein. And the first phase is basically eating ad libitum, to hunger. Eat when you're hungry, eat to fullness, and then see where you end up and see if you end up being weight stable at a certain calorie or food amount. They don't like to talk about calories. And what I discovered from that experience was that the leaner meats that we tend to have here in Norway and eating to hunger on those made my protein intake around 250 to 300 grams per day. And over time, that tended to mess with my blood sugar levels and insulin levels. I had ranging from high blood glucose, like morning fasting blood glucose, to really low. And it would like go super crazy low during the night, and I would have periods of like moodiness and lethargy, and so I just wanted to sort of figure out what happened, and they just told me outright that I had like a mild symptom of rabbit starvation, which for those of you don't know comes from the Alaskan hunters, I think, like several decades ago, when they would eat the super lean rabbits they could hunt because there were no other animals available. The lack of fat would lead to nutrient deficiencies and an excess protein intake and eventually make them feel really bad. So within this context, the high protein diet, like eating super high protein, was not very conducive to any outcomes for me. So I have been trying out their recommendations and eating a lot more fat, and my protein would end up around 100 to 150 grams per day, depending on the day. Would fluctuate a lot naturally. I did lose more weight. I did get a lot leaner. And I will say outright that this type of diet, animal meat and fat-based diet, is probably the easiest diet to get really lean and stay there. But I've also figured out that something in between those ratios seemed to work better for me as a guy lifting weights, and because I suspected, without being able to measure it accurately, that I have perhaps lost a little muscle mass. That could also be because I was sort of getting overly focused on losing body fat, so I perhaps didn't eat enough on some days. But it did tend to, it did improve my mood. It did improve my sleep. It basically improved a lot of things, just getting my protein into that moderate range, and obviously saved me a lot of money since fat is really cheap and meat is very expensive. And so I think, at least for me, I learned that keeping protein around maybe 140 to 200 grams per day is sort of going to be the sweet spot for me. But sort of reconciling my thoughts on the whole thing, I think the exclusion of plants and fruits and veggies and carbs is not going to be needed unless you have problems controlling your insulin and blood glucose. And for me, there also seems to be like a sweet spot for carbs. On workout days, I can obviously eat more, but I went through the trouble of not only measuring blood glucose 1 and 2 hours after every meal, but I also tried a continuous glucose monitoring system and just basically ate different types of food and saw what it did to my blood sugars. And there are certain carbs and certain amounts that tend to be a sweet spot for me, where blood glucose stays stable and I just feel great. Whereas eating more than that, or like eating a lot of rice and potatoes and very like carb dense foods, tend to make my blood sugar swing wildly and make me feel not so great and have tendencies to cravings. So I guess I'm sort of back full circle and just having like moderate everything, which sounds really fucking boring to most because we're all attracted to extreme approaches. But I'm just going to go ahead and say, and both the vegans and the zero carbers are right, because I do think within the seasonality aspect of things, and it's midsummer here and hot and warm and sunny, and having some carbs just feel instinctively right for me. So I do have some of them on my workout days. On some days I just don't feel like it, and I eat just all bacon and eggs and avocados and that kind of stuff. But I do think it has sort of tended to normalize a lot of things and just enabled me to stay way leaner than before without even trying.
Awesome. That was great. And so since you like to go on a little bit of a tangent, the next question will be pretty good for that because it's a pretty big one about but we all like it. The next one is a pretty big one on nutrient timing, or not nutrient timing, sort of structuring your meals to optimize circadian rhythms. So I know that you like to experiment with having, let's say, a bigger breakfast and then tapering off meals as the day go by, or vice versa. I know that you tried a lot of different things. So what's sort of your approach with regards to that? And maybe then you can also touch on how that ties into meal frequency, perhaps time-restricted feeding, and maybe how all of this modifies your recommendations for the optimal time to train. Because traditionally, you liked recommending working out in the afternoon or early ever. So that's a lot of points, but just some stuff you can touch on in there.
Okay, I'll see if I can make some sense here. There are studies looking at both sides of the coin, and again, like big breakfasts and small dinners and vice versa. And I think the answer is going to depend a lot on how metabolically flexible you are, and when you're training, and whether you're lean or not, and whether you have a good carb tolerance or not, because all of these studies are confounded by using overweight people, and it's kind of all over the place. And I have tried the big breakfast thing, and the main benefit of that is from like the circadian research. It's there are advantages to synchronizing food with daylight. And so starting off the day, it doesn't need to be jump right out of bed and grab a breakfast or protein shake or bacon and egg sandwich or something. But I would say probably within a couple of hours, you should have some breakfast. It doesn't have to be a big meal at all. But the benefit seems to be that having a big breakfast increases the spontaneous activity level, especially in obese people. And I did notice for me as well, depending on what foods I ate, I would feel full. Like, for instance, nowadays, since I'm training early and I have a big meal post-workout, I only have 2 meals per day, simply because that meal is huge, and I'm not hungry until like 4 or 5 o'clock. So then I have my last meal, and that's also huge, and I don't feel like eating anymore. And I find a meal frequency of 2 to 3 to work very well for most people, especially if you want to control your calories or an appetite. And that also seems to be the main benefit of time-restricted feeding. It makes it easier to control your calories. And it also provides like a stronger input to the circadian rhythm, where you want strong inputs from both light. You want strong daylight, and you want dim light in the evenings. You don't want strong light span. You want to move and be active during the day, and you don't want to like do a high intensity training session at 10 o'clock, because that's gonna disrupt your sleep. I know you might feel tired afterwards and feel like you sleep well, but when you measure actual sleep quality, it suffers a lot. So there's like timing to everything here, and I mean, I'm not going to force people to eat a lot of food for breakfast if they just don't feel like it. But in the studies, they have noticed that it takes 12 days to retrain yourself to a bigger meal early in the day. And after that, all the participants actually reported that they enjoyed it a lot. Some people say, well, if I eat a lot of calories for breakfast, I just end up eating a lot more foods later in the day. That doesn't seem to be the case as long as you have adapted to it. It actually tends to be the opposite. The reason why some studies show opposing results is because you're changing meal timing. You're changing a lot of stuff at the same time, and the change in stuff is more detrimental than the actual timing. So my current view is that you should probably have most of your food within an 8 to 10 hour window, up to 12 hours, 2 to 3 meals if you want to control your calories, and you need to control your calories because you have a hard time doing that. If you have a hard time eating enough, you should probably have 4 meals and some snacks in between. And you can probably also extend your eating window for that purpose. But again, for disease prevention, for metabolic inflexibility, and a lot of when things have gone wrong, restricted feeding or time-restricted feeding tends to have a pretty significant effect according to recent research. And I think all the carb backloading and again, I mean, the whole intermittent fasting. People who skip breakfast, eat a late lunch, and have their last meal like at midnight, they all tend to go to bed way past midnight. I mean, even Martin Birkin in his most productive posts online are written like 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And I mean, he can get away with that. And Menno used to be like that as well. But I think, and we know that sleep is so incredibly important to all of this. Whatever we want to do, whether it be get bigger or get leaner, we need to get our sleep in, and that sleep needs to be of high quality. That the whole circadian rhythm aspect of things just makes it easier to achieve that deep sleep during the night, and having more energy and higher activity levels, spontaneous activity levels, like without having to be consciously moving around, sort of thing, during the daytime. So skipping breakfast can be fine and for a long time in some people, but if that tends to make you eat a lot more calories later in the day, not so much. Having more foods around your workouts, that's going to be big. So let's say you have a baseline of like substantial breakfast and a slightly smaller dinner. If you train later, that dinner is going to be huge as well, simply because you created a sink for incoming calories and a demand for incoming calories. So now the breakfast, maybe it's going to be just the same size, but the dinner is going to be way larger simply because you need those calories to support recovery and muscle growth. And even though there are guys getting away with like OMAD, which is 1 meal a day, and even training in the morning and eating the big meal at night and growing muscle and getting leaner and all that, just based sort of on experience and my thoughts on the matter, I think having, like a substantial calorie load within a couple of hours post workout is going to be a good idea, no matter when that workout is. Again, according to circadian rhythm stuff, you tend to perform better in the afternoon. And that's generally speaking, because for myself, I use my brain so much during the day that I'm basically just exhausted, and also from watching a kid that's just now learning to crawl around and destroy stuff. So for me, my best workouts are in the morning when he's barely awake or just awake, and my girlfriend can watch him and just get in my workout. My pre-workout meal now is like 3 eggs and a teaspoon of honey. I go to the gym, have my sustainable self-development training in, and go home, eat a large meal. And then I have like my dinner at 4 or 5 p.m. And that's for me a very sustainable approach, that I'm not hungry during the evenings at all. I have no cravings. I feel energetic until like 8 o'clock, because it takes like 2 to 3 hours for that meal to sort of digest properly, insulin levels to drop, and basically the body to slow down. So it has improved sleep quality a lot, and I'm just tired as fuck at 10 p.m. And if I go to bed then and my son is quiet, then we all get a good night's sleep. And I think that was it. I think that covered it all.
Yeah, it did. No, and it's actually perfect because we had a lot of good questions, but actually you answered a lot already indirectly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, a good question, which is, what are your top tips for dealing with bloating? Close to my heart.
With bloating, oh yeah, stop eating veggies for a while. Stop eating plant foods. The zero carb diet, carnivore approach. But I would advise now, if I were to rewrite the book, having more fats compared to proteins. Watch your sodium intake for a while. And since both sunlight and heat can increase like water retention, you might have to stay out of the sun if for a day before some photo shoot or whatever. But like bloating in general is caused by digestive upset and just your gut function being suboptimal. So I would really look into, first of all, just reducing the load on the digestion, and then just sort of try to repair things. And again, deferring to paleomedicina, where they have this gut permeability test, and they actually see things just improving on a weekly basis when they eat their type of approach. And just the more plant foods and nuts and grains and even alcohol you introduce to the mix, the longer time it takes for that gut permeability to improve. So for some people, you might have to just sort of stay on this approach for maybe up to 6 to 8 weeks, and then gradually reintroduce foods and see how you feel on them. And don't expect to, like a lot of clients that I did this with, they introduced like immediate improvements. I mean, they could suddenly eat foods that they could not eat before. Some people would have to reintroduce that food in small amounts and gradually build up to it. The same way you can actually, like for some people that are very sensitive to dairy products, if you just reintroduce yogurt or kefir, like 1 tablespoon at a time, then you can gradually adapt to tolerate those. So we are incredibly adaptive and able to tolerate a lot of foods. And the reason why we lose that ability is probably because we're constantly bombarding our guts with it, and we're not taking a break from eating, period. We're just eating constantly. And we're not taking a break from eating all types of food all the time, simply because we have so much access to it. So just removing some of that for some time, and I mean the most digestible food you can eat is meat and fat. I mean, I remember back in school when we did these experiments where we recreated like stomach acid or the stomach fluid. And we just dropped pieces of meat, we dropped pieces of corn, bread, and just different types of foodstuffs in there. And the next day when we came back in class, the only glass that was completely, transparent was the one with the meat, because all the meat had just completely dissolved. And we also know this from people that have to, what's the word for it? When you have to have like the bag on your, like the pouch on your belly. Like you have to take your intestine because your intestinal health, or you have some stomach ulcers or something, and you have to have sort of ileostomy bag or whatever it's called on the outside, and you can actually see food stuff passing through. And what these patients report is that, well, they see a lot of fiber and plant matter moving through there, but you never see pieces of meat moving through there, which means that this is digested very readily early in the intestine. So yeah, resort to the most digestible foods. Remove any confounding. You can view this as a very extreme elimination diet, and then just gradually introduce food groups and foods and see how you feel. Allow 3 to 5 days, see how you feel on that, and I mean, even the fermented foods and the probiotics and all that stuff, I would actually wait until you have reset things, because we don't know enough about the microbiome to tell whether do we actually need these bacteria to be well, or do we need them to digest the foods that require them. And just removing all of those foods and sort of going back to zero, and then sort of reintroducing foods and retraining the ability to tolerate and digest those foods, and perhaps concurrently repairing a gut permeability or something can that might be able to eliminate a lot of the digestive issues that people have, and obviously in addition to managing your lifestyle and your stress, because it's been proven that a lot of food intolerances are simply caused by people worrying so much about that food that their immune system is actually creating a response like that food is actually dangerous to you simply because you believe it to be. So there's a huge psychological component in this.
Yeah, just for people who might be reluctant to try out a carnivorous approach, like before you embarked on this experiment, were there certain things that you tried here and there and helped sometimes when you needed to alleviate some acute bloating that were more successful than other strategies?
Wow, I mean, I tried it all, and I can't say that any of them were successful. I mean, I went through the whole probiotic, all types of supplements, prebiotics. I did the fermented foods. I did high plant. I did FODMAPs, the low FODMAP diet. I even eliminated all of the moderate and high FODMAPs and ate only low FODMAPs. I ate only rice for a while, and minor amounts of just berries, and still suffered. And I listened to speeches of some of the top like gut experts and professors in the world, even a Norwegian one, and tried this like eating oatmeal for all meals, and even boiled oatmeal and soaked oatmeal and kefir and yogurt cultures, and you wouldn't believe I've tried it all. And the only thing that really helped was eliminating all of it and then reintroducing it.
Yeah. Yeah, like one thing that I can tell from experience there is that when you're deep in the woods with bloating, then it's really hard to just eliminate one thing and expect results. Like when I was done with my carnivore diet experiment, I did it for almost 3 months actually. And after that, I introduced some strawberries. Well, a lot of strawberries, probably more than what was reasonable at one go.
We indulged in strawberries, like you told me.
Yeah, I indulged in strawberries, but I was completely fine, and like no bloating whatsoever. Everything was completely fine. Whereas before, when I had these 9-month pregnant lady periods when I was just bloated to the max, and then I tried to go with only strawberries as carb sources or something, I was equally bloated. So when you're deep in the woods, then just tweaking your fiber source, sometimes that just won't cut it. But
no.
Yeah,
it would vary so much from day to day that you couldn't even tell what's causing it, what's alleviating it, and there would be like no connection to anything. I couldn't make sense of it at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So okay, so let's see. There was a good question about how do you listen to your hunger on a zero carb approach, which is sort of a question that doesn't make sense, but on the other hand, it does make a lot of sense, because on a carb-based diet, it's really clear cut. Like you're either hungry or you're not, or like it's on and off kind of. And on a zero carb diet, or just on a very high fat, lower carb diet, you can go so long without food and you're never really hungry, but you just kind of get low energy. And this person also said that, I think it was Zach, but I could be wrong. He also said that if he waits until that point when he is just low on energy and then he starts eating, then it will take a long time until that energy sort of hits his system. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think generally I try to have consistent meal times, but I have, tried to be like smart and eat smaller meals because I wanted to lose fat or see if I could lean out more or do calorie cycling or whatever. And I just ended up being moody and cranky. And again, if you're in doubt, just eat. Yeah. I mean, it's really that simple. Even if it's just having a snack or something, if that immediately improves your mood, then yeah, you were doing something right. You were actually in need of food. But yeah, I know it's tricky, and that's sort of the main strength of keto adaptation and adapting to this type of diet, that you retrain the brain to listen to actual physiological hunger cues, like your body fat stores and body fat mobilization and energy availability. Whereas on the carb-based diet, you're just constantly a slave to the blood glucose excursions. So just from that perspective alone, I think everyone should go through like a keto adaptation period and then reintroduce carbs. And but I think it's just sort of, if you stop being OCD about calories and when and how much to eat, you will quickly learn this within a couple of days. Because I mean, if I'm just really aware of how much I need to eat versus logging and thinking I should eat this much, then the first approach is always going to win. And if you make any sort of mistake, I mean, if you just sort of well, I didn't eat enough, then you will sort of immediately, or not immediately, but after only a few hours, you will definitely notice that. Then instead of waiting until you actually know, and then perhaps end up overeating or just becoming like a monster or something, then at least that's what my girlfriend calls me when I'm in that mood. Then just eat. And my girlfriend has been going through the same type of diet, and I would sit there and watch her and see her kind of thinking, and okay, I should only eat like 2 eggs and some bacon and not too much avocado. And like 3 hours later, oh my God, I could really have a piece of chocolate now. Oh my God, don't those brownies look delicious? And it's like, I was going to tell you, your breakfast was, that's not going to cut it. You're going to have to eat more. You're going to have to dare to actually eat more. And again, this is related to a question that I have been, I got this question like repeatedly from the same person in the group. I'm not going to name any names, but it's so apparent that she's been chronically undereating for many years, or at least a very long time, trying to lose weight that way. And just the whole restrictive mindset, and well, I can't eat this much fat, and I have to sort of control and restrict, and this one day when I tried to eat to hunger, I just ended up eating a lot of food, and it was that much calories, and that's not going to make me lose weight, etc., etc. And you can just tell the whole neuroticism from the text that this is someone who needs to actually maybe even consciously overeat to recalibrate their hunger signaling, and through this diet for maybe up to 6 to 8 weeks, and also increase their metabolism, because chronically undereating something just makes the whole metabolism slow down, and sort of retrain the body to both mobilize and burn off fatty acids when you're getting hungry. So that, again, the energy availability is a sum of the stored body fat on your body and the incoming calories from the foods. And if there's an imbalance there, combined with not having sort of a reset brain or leptin sensitivity and the ability to, like the metabolic flexibility I talked about earlier, then yeah, you're probably going to have to overeat and feel the need to overeat, at least for a few days. But if you trust the process, I've been doing this for so many years, and it's always girls that have to go through the phase of being forced to eat more calories than they think they need. And I have countless of stories of girls telling me, well, I restrict to 1,500, 1,200 calories, I can't lose any weight. And then after like 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, sometimes it takes that long, they are now losing weight and body fat at 2,000 and 2,500 calories even for some girls. And it's not like a physiological miracle. It's simply because you need to move away from the whole black box model where it's calories in, calories out. You have to consider what's going on inside of this black box, and this black box obviously being your own body, where the body will sort of partition the calories and nutrients and use fats, or have the fat stay there and use glucose instead, and sort of manipulate things according to how healthy it is on the inside. And it's going to be very unhealthy if you've had like a restrictive approach and mindset to foods for a long time, and you're constantly stressing and worrying about it. So yeah, it's going to take a while. You're going to have to actually feel like you're force feeding for a while, and then. I mean, I've seen it a lot of times in the zero carb Facebook groups. It's 95% of the time is women and girls, and they're saying, "Oh no, I feel like I need to eat all the time. I don't get the hunger suppressing effects that everyone is bragging about, and I'm gaining weight." And these are always women with a history of yo-yo dieting and restriction. And for those who actually stick to it, they will gain weight for a while, but then they will suddenly start losing a lot of weight. And they will drop way below what they gained when they started, and then keep losing weight. And so there's some sort of repair going on, and I don't ascribe it to a meat-based diet at all. I ascribe it to having sufficient calories for a sufficient amount of time. And both you and I know about this, Abel. I mean, we have both been through this whole restrictive mindset, eternal dieting kind of thing, where everything just slows down. I mean, the metabolism slows down. The hormones don't function as well as they should anymore. And just looking at the brownie from the wrong angle will make you gain weight. And that's not a good place to be in. So just sticking to at least maintenance calories and probably also slightly above for a while, and making sure that the body is at an optimal place, and at the same time having like a balanced approach to the nutrient or nutrition time of things, just to repair things. Then you can start to consider losing body fat and body weight, and that's basically the story of my last 5 to 10 years of doing this. I now feel like I can unconsciously just lose body fat effortlessly and sustainably, and not feel like I'm restricting or have to avoid anything. Just all sorts of cravings for carb foods and junk foods has just disappeared eating this way for a sufficiently amount of time, and making sure that I don't undereat and respect my cues, the hunger cues.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. And with that, would you actually say that when you're really trying to get lean fast, or you're trying to introduce this, or you want to try out a carnivore type diet, then perhaps it's best to first not bother with fat loss necessarily, but first just eat enough and kind of go through the adaptation period and learn to run on fats and those sorts of things, and then think about fat loss after some period?
Well, not for everyone, but for those who have been calorie restricting or being on diets for a long time, yes. I would make sure that the first 2 to 4 weeks that you're actually eating enough foods and not consciously restricting anything at all. And then you can start to because that will sort of reset things and allow you to trust hunger in a better way. It might have to require you to count calories even to make sure you're eating enough. I know I had to. But for most people, just I've just seen all of these stories from people that just started eating meat and meat and fat-based diets. I would actually tend to gravitate towards a higher fat to protein ratio in grams, based on my experience with that. And eating ad libitum, meaning to hunger and to satiety. That just seems to make a lot of people lose weight effortlessly without even trying. So most people should probably be fine doing that. But if you've been through the whole yo dieting side of things and just consciously restricting and have a very neurotic perspective on your own, like body dysmorphia or anorexia or those type of things, you should probably almost feel like you're force feeding and count calories and see that you're actually eating at maintenance and slightly above. Yes.
Awesome. Well, Borge, we actually went for like an hour. We still have a few questions. That we didn't go over. So I don't know, maybe we can record another shorter one, in a week or something. And
yeah, and I believe there's probably going to be a lot of follow-up questions to this one as well. So I hope it's okay with you guys that ask these questions that you wait one more week. There's also a lot of questions in the Facebook group, and I do answer some of them, but some of them also belong in the Q&A so that more people can get help from that. And I'm also gonna say, like we also discussed, that there are going to be skeptics. There are going to be people saying that this is wrong, or this or the other expert or study says another thing. But keep in mind that the name of this group is Sustainable Self-Development, and our main purpose is to help people who have tried it all and have, they have no results or basically not the expected results to show from it. And they're struggling because of their lifestyles and optimal meets life as it usually does. And since our intent is mainly to help them, sometimes you guys just gonna have to trust that I've been doing my due diligence and I have weighed both pros and cons, and I've read thousands of studies and discussed and listened to all types of experts and authorities on this topic. And the reason why I've approached this, or I find myself being sort of in the middle, is because the extreme approaches only work for a short amount of time. And you can always find a study or expert to contradict our views, but the view is based on a more sustainable approach that will fit most people. And if you have some serious disease, or you're using steroids and drugs, or you're outlier, then okay, maybe this is not going to apply to you. But most people are going to get a lot of help from this. So please don't make me waste a lot of time picking apart single studies or expert opinions, because I'm not gonna play that game at all. I hope that doesn't piss off too many people, but if it does, I don't care. Honestly, I don't care, because it's gonna help. If it's gonna help 99 people and there's one pissed off guy, then sorry, you're just gonna have to hate me.
Yeah. I thought you were going to finish that sentence in a different way. You're just gonna have to.
I thought so too, but I looked out on the view here and I figured that let's not waste this beautiful evening on something as trivial as
holy shit,
as hate.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, that's why in the intro of my podcast I recorded this funny spot where I was basically making fun of the guy whose main mission is to just micromanage the hell out of everything. And I kind of responded to that hypothetical person by saying that in this podcast and in this community, we only micromanage things to the extent that it is actually serving us. So, and I think what you said just speaks of that. So, yeah, I think this was a really cool and really productive Q&A. So, Borge, I want to thank you for your time, and you guys also for your questions. And yeah, so we will make an effort to record another one then perhaps next week, and we will go over the questions which you couldn't answer in this one. And then if you have follow-ups, we will see how those fit into that Q&A as well. So
yeah, as soon as I will post the event, and you can just bombard us with questions, and we will get through as many of them as possible. It's the same thing as the Q&A number 1, where I had to go into my whole perspective on training, and then Q&A number 2, where I could actually start answering a lot of questions. It's going to be the same thing now. I had to spend like 20-25 minutes just describing my perspective on things, and then we can dig into a lot more questions.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and see you all next time.
See you all.
All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this episode. And once again, if you haven't checked it out already, be sure to visit the Sustainable Self-Development Facebook group at facebook.com/sustainable self-development. And if you haven't done it already, visit sustainableselfdevelopment.com to be up to date with everything that we've got going on there. All right, thank you for hanging on up until now, and see you in the next episode.